So for this lesson, we're going to look at gunshot residue and wounds that we find on the body. So first off, whenever you fire a gun, that gunpowder is going to ignite. Some of that gunpowder is going to be released from different parts of the gun. So you can see here, out of the barrel. Sometimes we'll get it right out of the chambers. And it used to be a big plume of white smoke, but now we see it as barely a faint white, or it's smokeless most times. So when people fire a gun, they think that nothing really comes out of it, but really there's smoke that comes out of all the time. When that gunpowder ignites, you get a couple things that come out. You're going to get soot, which is really just like dust and some of those powders. And then you're going to get unburned powder, which could be nitrates, lead, barium. You're also going to get ignited gunpowder, which is going to, it can actually burn the skin of a victim if it's close enough. So you're going to get a lot of color on, the closer you get to a victim, you're getting a lot of color right around that entry wound. When you fire a gun, you can get it on your hands or even on your clothes, especially if you're wearing long sleeves or if you're holding it close to your body. And then also, like I was just saying, it can be left on the victim's body as well, as long as you're fairly close. Usually what they say within 3 feet, something will wind up on around the wound. If it's right up against the body, then you're going to get more than just the wound and the burn marks. You're going to get a lot of that gunshot residue on their clothing as well. So when we look at wounds that go into the body, and actually that go through clothing as well, they'll leave similar marks. You want to first identify your marks. Entry wounds are usually much smaller, so you can see the comparison here between entry and exit wounds. So if you look, let's say, just at the .45 caliber, it's pretty high-powered ammunition. You can see that the entry wound is fairly small still, but the exit wound is quite large, and that's because, remember, a bullet, if we look at this, what a bullet looks like, right? As it penetrates through skin and it starts hitting things, that thing is going to turn into kind of like a mushroom head, and it's also going to be pulling more stuff with it. So when it exits the body, it's going to take more of the skin with it, and it's going to want to pull a lot of stuff outwards with it. Okay, so you're going to have a much larger wound on the exit than on the entry. The entry wound is actually going to pull stuff in with it, and the exit wound is going to pull stuff out of the body, so it's going to really rip that skin wide open. If we move forward here, here's another look at it. Here's your entry wound, straight on 90 degrees. You're going to see that you have what we call an abrasion collar. An abrasion collar just leaves a darker line or rim around the wound, and then you have your gunshot residue that's going to leave a charring mark. Okay, if it comes in at an angle, it's almost the opposite of a blood drop. Remember, a blood drop, when it hit, it would leave a bigger mark, right? If a blood drop was moving in that direction from left to right, it would leave a bigger mark where it first hits, but actually a gunshot wound is the opposite, because as that bullet goes in, it's going to be cleaner towards the back here, and it's going to create a burning residual mark moving forward. So you're going to get a fatter area towards the more advanced part of that bullet. So like I said before, you have gunshot residue on the clothing. That's as long as the gunshot is fairly close. And if we look at this diagram right here, you can see where if you're really close, you're going to get a massive amount of smoke and soot and all that unburned material on you. And then the further away you get, obviously less gets to you. The bullet comes and hits the body and hits the clothing, but you won't get this massive staining around it unless you're fairly close. Okay. If the gun is in contact with the clothing, you'll get burning around that hole. So you would see it, you'd get a lot of markings around that. You get a lot of black. If it's polyester, you would get melting of those fibers just because it's so hot coming out of that gun. And this is just a basic. If you're about 12 to 18 inches away, you get a halo of lead smoke, meaning it's not that dark. So if we look here, okay, we would kind of consider that a halo rather than a very, very dark mark. This is within 6 feet, so that, I mean 6 inches. That's under 6 inches, and as we move out, that halo gets a little bit larger and fainter, and all guns are different, but that's just a basic look at, you know, a regular handgun. You'll see that those markings, and here you can see further, very far away, you get no markings other than just a bullet hole. We also have something called stippling. So when a gun is fired, you have this burned ammunition coming out, these burned gunpowder fragments and compounds coming out. So if the gun is very, very close to the skin, you're going to get this tattooing, as we call it. So here, okay, so that's not soot, that's actually the skin being burned, and this would be almost a contact fire. So this, I would say, this is less than, let's say, 3 inches, if not touching the skin. And then this, you would do kind of your math from that last slide. All the guns are different, but this is probably somewhere around 12 inches. Okay, maybe a little bit, probably right around 12, maybe a little bit less, but the further out you get this stippling out in here, that means the gun barrel was a little farther away, because if you're very, very close, as you see here, if the gun is really, really close, you're not going to get much of that expansion of that burned gunpowder. But over here, you see that the gun wasn't up against the skin because the burning elements were able to spread a little bit away from that hole. Okay, here's a look. If we read up top, the one on the left was produced from close range shot. You can see how dark and black that is. The bullet hole on the right was produced several feet away, maybe close to 2-3 feet, I would say. You still get that kind of halo around it, and that darker charring. This is just because that bullet is still hot. But this mark would be from further away, obviously. This one from very, very close, just because of the darkness of the color. Okay, last thing for imprints and gunshot residue, it's called a muzzle imprint. And when you fire that gun, the gun's going to want to try to recoil in your hand. And if you're pressing up against the skin, it's going to leave an impression because you're pushing forward, the gun is fired. It's going to kick back in your hand, but it's also going to go back forward if you're holding that gun securely enough. So here you can see this one mimics this gun almost perfectly, and this one shows how that barrel almost has like a double ring to it, showing this movement, that imprint right there. Okay, one last thing, just to kind of jump through what we covered already. We have the NIBIN database. I know we kind of talked about it, we saw in the video, but just to go over it one more time. The database uses technology to categorize bullet casings and bullets that come out of different guns, and they can use this to better find those individuals that may have committed several crimes but never were found. Okay, hopefully this helps, and please feel free to contact me if you have any questions.